Hello, it's Randi Rhodes. Here's a clip from our show, and go to randyrhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.
Mary had a little man.
The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe me.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
So here's the first question. If a Democratic debate happens in the middle of an impeachment, does it make a sound? Yeah, we did both. We watched both. But right now, there is live testimony. I'm about 5 minutes behind because I want you to hear an important, section that happened about 5 minutes ago. Eric Swalwell is questioning Fiona Hill, our previous Russia expert, who was removed from her post and replaced by the GOP's witness, Tim Morrison, the other day, right? Remember Tim Morrison? These were the GOP picks for their witnesses. Tim Morrison was one. Sondland was one. So anyway, and Volker, these were the Republican picks. So this was an important exchange between Eric Swalwell for Fiona Hill. And it has to do with Devin Nunes and Devin Nunes's former staffer, Kash Patel, and also Lev Parnas, who's indicted now, a Rudy Giuliani associate who's been indicted for funneling foreign money into GOP elections. And so we'll pick up with Eric Swalwell. This is only about 5 minutes, delayed. And then during the break, we'll catch up and go live. Or not.
Dr. Hill, yes.
Oh, my God.
Yesterday, I think a lot of Americans were scratching their heads as Ambassador Sondland testified that on September 9, he calls the President of the United States and just says broadly, "What do you want from Ukraine?" And the President says, "There's no quid pro quo. There's no quid pro quo." It's like being pulled over for speeding and being asked, "Do you know how fast you're going?" and saying, "I didn't rob the bank. I didn't rob the bank." But your testimony today is that on July 10 of this year, you told one of the president's lawyers that you had concerns that a White House meeting was linked to investigations. Is that right?
That's correct, based on what Ambassador Sondland said in the wardroom.
And so as early as July 10, the president's lawyers had knowledge that there was at least concern by a presidential employee about a linkage. Is that right?
That's correct.
Dr. Hill, just like you, we are trying to account for all the president's men. You had that same concern when you saw Mr. Sondland's emails and you saw people who were outside the channels that you had been working on. So I want to walk you through something you told us earlier. You said that you have evidence that as recently as this year, President Trump believed someone named Kash was the Ukraine director. Is that right?
It's not really evidence. And look, I want to be very clear about this. I was asked a question about this in my deposition. I did not raise it. And to be honest, I was surprised that I was asked the question.
But you heard that name Kash. Is that right?
I did, but again, it was in passing, and I explained the circumstances in which this came up. But I was asked a question in the course of my deposition about it.
And the only person at the time who worked at the National Security Council was Kash Patel. Is that right?
It was the only person that I could think of.
And Kash Patel, prior to working for the National Security Council from 2017 to 2018, worked for Ranking Member Nunes. Is that right?
I actually only found that out after the fact.
And
Because I wondered why I was being asked about him, so I went and looked this up.
And Dr. Hill, you cautioned us on the dangers of members of this committee, perhaps peddling any Ukrainian conspiracy theories that could benefit Russia. And I want to ask you if you have heard the name Lev Parnas of Ukraine, someone in this investigation who was influencing President Trump and Rudy Giuliani about some of the debunked conspiracy theories you referenced earlier.
I have heard his name, yes.
Are you aware that Mr. Parnas was indicted on October 10 for making foreign contributions to Republicans in U.S. elections?
I am aware of those reports, yes.
Are you aware of yesterday's Daily Beast story reporting the indicted Ukrainian Lev Parnas has been working with Ranking Member Devin Nunes on Mr. Nunes's overseas investigations?
I am not aware of that.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to put into the record the Daily Beast story. Lev Parnas helped Rep. Devin Nunes's investigations from yesterday First two paragraphs reading, Lev Parnas, an indicted associate of Rudy Giuliani, helped arrange meetings and calls in Europe for Rep. Devin Nunes in 2018, Parnas' lawyer, Ed McMahon, told the Daily Beast. Nunes' aide, Derek Harvey, participated in the meetings, the lawyer said, which were arranged to help Nunes' investigative work. McMahon didn't specify what those investigations entailed.
Without objection.
Mr. Chairman, you have been falsely accused throughout these proceedings by the ranking member as being a quote-unquote fact witness. Now, if this story is correct, the ranking member may have actually been projecting. And in fact, he may be the fact witness if he is working with indicted individuals around our investigation. But I want to go to what this is really all about. First, it's your credibility, Mr. Holmes. And can you tell us and confirm that in 2014, you received the William Rivkin Constructive Dissent Award from the Obama administration State Department?
Yes, sir.
And that was for dissent that you brought up against an administration policy, is that right?
That's right.
Congratulations, and thank you for speaking up in the way that you did. But what we're really here about is what you're working on in Ukraine. And I want you to take a look at the picture. Who do you see in the foreground of that photo?
President Zelensky.
That's a photograph in May 2019, where newly elected President Zelensky visited the Luhansk region in eastern Ukraine. It was his first visit to the front lines of Donbass as president. Can you just tell tax-paying Americans why it's so important that our hard-earned tax-paying dollars help President Zelensky and the men standing beside him fight against Russia in this hot war?
Absolutely, sir. President Zelensky was elected on an overwhelming majority to defend Ukrainian interests. This is at a time when Ukrainians are defending their sovereignty, their territorial integrity on Ukrainian soil from Russian-backed soldiers who are attacking them. As I said, 14,000 Ukrainian lives lost in this war so far. As I mentioned, a few this week already. And this is a hot war. This is not a frozen conflict. People are shooting at each other and dying, being injured every single week. And despite the ongoing war, they're still trying to pursue peace. President Zelensky, even right now, is trying to pursue a summit meeting with President Putin in order to try to bring this war to a conclusion so that they can move on with all of the difficult things they need to do in terms of building the economy and reforming the judiciary and whatnot. And I want to add just one other thing, sir, if I may. Mr. Turner had suggested earlier that I'd somehow embarrassed President Zelensky. I have the deepest respect for President Zelensky. This is a guy of Jewish background from a post-Soviet industrial suburb in southern Ukraine who made himself one of the most popular entertainers in the country and somehow got elected president, and he's not going to miss that opportunity. This is a Ukrainian patriot. This is a tough guy, and frankly, he withstood a lot of pressure for a very long time, and he didn't give that interview. I have the deepest respect for him. The Ukrainian people also have the deepest respect for him. They've chosen him to help deliver the full measure of promise of their revolution of dignity, and I think he merits all of our respect.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter the May 27 photograph depicted on the screen into the record.
Without objection, Mr. Hurd.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. Mr. Holmes, for your years of service to this.
All right, I'm going to pause it here. We'll catch up. I'm going to go live when we come back on the other side. But I just wanted you to hear how Devin Nunes' staffers and an indicted felon, a man facing felony charges of putting foreign money into the GOP coffers, were all working with Devin Nunes, who is accusing the Democrats of doing exactly what he is doing, inserting himself and his staff into Ukrainian politics. I mean, it's just, that was amazing to me. It really was, because there is a Daily Beast article about Lev Parnas, who's indicted, and how he was arranging meetings in Europe for Devin Nunes and Rudy Giuliani, so that they could talk to the corrupt officials and get the corrupt officials to implicate Democrats.
All things Randi at RandiRhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, the Randi Rhodes Show.
So I imagine, I don't know, but I imagine that these are the final two witnesses that the impeachment inquiry hearings will hear from today. So you have Fiona Hill, who was our Russian expert. She was fired and replaced with Tim Morrison, who is a right-wing hawk. And still testified there was a quid pro quo that he was aware of, in spite of, being a handpicked person by the Donald Trump. And then you have this man, David Holmes, who was the subject of Ambassador Bill Taylor's testimony, that bombshell that Bill Taylor testified to on day one. Remember, he said that there was a guy that worked for him, an aide to Bill Taylor, Ambassador Bill Taylor, who was sitting at a table when Ambassador Sondland called the president the day after the president spoke on July 25th to Zelensky, right? And he said the day after, Sondland called from a restaurant in front of Mr. Holmes and told, that David Holmes could hear what the president was saying. And the president was saying, so are they going to do the investigations? And then they hung up. And so Mr. Holmes asked Ambassador Sondland, what is the president concerned about? And he said, well, he doesn't give a crap about Ukraine. He cares about the big stuff. And David Holmes said, well, what big stuff? I mean, the big stuff is there's a hot war going on here in Russia and other issues. And he said, no, just the big stuff that applies to him. He only cares about the investigations into the Bidens that Rudy Giuliani demanded. Now, what's interesting about that is Sondland, testified yesterday, and he said he didn't know that Burisma was the Bidens. Now, obviously that's a lie. But let's go back into the live hearing now. This is Representative Denny Heck. He's a Democrat from Washington State, and he's questioning David Holmes, who his official title is U.S. Political Affairs Counselor in Ukraine.
Means subjugate Ukraine, attempt to render it a client state, if not occupy it?
Absolutely, sir. It's been said that without Ukraine, Russia's just a country, but with it, it's an empire.
I feel like I've been treated to a Gatling gun fire of myth propagation over the last couple of weeks, and it reminds me of that old expression about the big lie. If you tell it often enough and keep repeating it, that people will come to believe it. And I think we've been subjected to some of that. Here's a sample. The president didn't solicit campaign assistance from Ukraine in a clear violation of federal law. Yes, he did. The president didn't withhold vital military assistance in furtherance of his objective to obtain that campaign assistance. Yes, he did. Rudy Giuliani was acting just on his own, kind of as a rogue. No, he wasn't. That all this is business as usual. This happens all the time and stems from a principled interest. No, it isn't, and no, it wasn't. And that it's okay to attack patriotic diplomats in public service if they stand in your way and have the courage to speak up. And no, it isn't. Those are just some of the big lies. But here's the big truth. The president did it. He did it. We all just came from the floor. And it's a majestic chamber. And in the front of the chamber, there are only two portraits. On the left, looking forward, is my favorite president, George Washington. And on the right is the Marquis de Lafayette, who came to this country to help us stand up our fledgling democracy. So here's another big truth. Without his help, we probably never would have gotten off the ground. And that assistance from many other countries who are helping us to create something that had never been created before. It was an audacious idea. This notion of a democracy, of self-governance, of freedoms such as speech and press and religion and expression and assembly, and most of all, that it would be rooted in the premise of the rule of law. Not monarchs, not military strongmen, but the rule of law. Others helped us to get here, and we wouldn't be here without them. And I frankly feel like we're almost in a little bit of a pay it forward moment. So when the president did it, he put at risk the security of Ukraine, a strategic ally and a nascent democracy with their masses yearning to breathe free, who 6 years ago this day, when their government said we're not going to sign that memorandum of agreement with the European Union, rose up and took to the streets because they wanted, frankly, what we have. And when the president did it, he put our own national security at risk. But what he did, most importantly, was put at risk that idea that makes us exceptional. Because I do believe America is truly exceptional. We are a country rooted in something that nobody has ever tried before, rule of law. He put that at risk when he did what he did. The president did it. And the only question that remains is, what will we do? I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, God.
Dr. Hill, during your deposition, I asked you, was Christopher Steele's dossier
Are you kidding?
a rabbit hole? Do you remember the answer you gave to that
Yes,
question?
I thought it was a rabbit hole.
Yeah, and you also said a couple pages later in the deposition, or in the transcript that I have here of your deposition, that you thought he got played. Is that fair?
That is fair, yes.
I was struck by a number of things you said in your statement, a number of things I thought were right on the target, and one was on page 7. You said this: President Putin and the Russian security services weaponize our own political opposition research. And that is exactly what happened in 2016. Exactly what happened. You called it, you knew it, you saw it. The DNC hired Perkins Coie, who hired Fusion GPS, who hired Christopher Steele, who talked to Russians, who gave him a bunch of dirt, bunch of National Enquirer garbage that he compiled in a dossier, and our FBI used it. They used it as part of their investigation that they opened in July of 2016, where they spied on 2 American citizens associated with the presidential campaign. My guess is that's probably never happened in American history, and exactly what Dr. Hill talked about is what happened in 2016. Exactly what she talked about.
Why don't you ask her a question? I don't understand all this speechifying, but I will say that puts to rest the idea that the secret dungeon did not include Republicans. Because there's Jim Jordan saying, I asked you in your deposition. I asked you in your deposition. Now what he's doing is twisting the facts. Okay. And they're never, ever going to let go of Hillary Clinton did it. Never. Never. But Russia did it.
561-270-3844.
All right, just so you know, Jim Jordan had no question for either of the witnesses sitting right in front of him. And this is the second time today that Jim Jordan has had 5 minutes to ask a question of either of the witnesses sitting in front of him today. And he failed to ask any questions of the 2 witnesses sitting in front of him today. Just saying. All right, so let's go back live. This is Representative Peter Welch. He is a Democrat from Vermont. And I don't know if he has a question for either of the witnesses sitting in front of him today.
A CEO would be fired. We all know this kind of conduct is wrong, but the president continues to say it isn't. He says it's perfect, and he'd do it again tomorrow. The same rules apply to mayors, governors, members of Congress, CEOs, and everyone else in America. They apply to the president too. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you like MSNBC or Fox, I think every American believes in one of our nation's founding principles: no person is above the law, not even the president. On July 24th, Director Mueller testified about Russian state-sponsored systematic interference in our 2016 election. He expressed apprehension this could become the new normal. The day after, on July 25th, President Trump spoke to President Zelensky and asked a favor. That favor was that Ukraine interfere in our 2020 election. If we allow this to stand, to become the new normal, it will be the standard for all future presidents. In good conscience, none of us can do that. This conduct corrupts our democracy. It corrupts how our country conducts foreign policy. It threatens our national security and the security of all Americans. And it is, in my view, a clear betrayal of the President's oath of office. I yield back.
Mr. Maloney.
Mr. Chairman, two quick housekeeping matters. Ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an ABC News story. This one's for my friend, Mr. Stewart, entitled 70% of Americans say Trump's actions tied to Ukraine were wrong, dated November 18th, 2019.
Without objection.
Also ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a New Yorker story entitled The Invention of the Conspiracy Theory on Biden and Ukraine, how a conservative dark money group that targeted Hillary Clinton in 2016 spread the discredited story that may lead to Donald Trump's impeachment. Jane Mayer, October 4th, 2019.
Without objection.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. Dr. Hill, first of all, I thought that was some epic mansplaining that you were forced to endure by my colleague, Mr. Turner, and I want you to know some of us think it was inappropriate, but I appreciate your forbearance. Let me ask something. I'm fascinated by this meeting, two meetings really, on July 10th. You have the meeting in Mr. Bolton's office. Sondland says this thing about investigations. Bolton ends the meeting. Photo. There's a follow-on meeting in the wardroom. And you get there a little late, and Vindman is talking to Sondland, and they're already going at it about Sondland's desire to assert that the meeting's going to happen if there's these investigations. That, in sum and substance, what's going on?
That's it, right, yes.
And what I want to understand is this isn't a policy disagreement, right?
No, that's not. That's correct.
The source of your concern is not a policy disagreement, and it's not purely a procedural disagreement either, right? About how excuse me.
I'm sorry. Yes, it's not correct.
It's neither policy nor is it procedure that's bothering you, or for that matter, the National Security Advisor, Mr. Bolton, right?
Correct.
I mean, it's not why he sends you down there to see how the meeting's going.
Correct.
And in fact, he instructs you to go to the lawyer. Ever been instructed to go report something to the NSC lawyer before?
That was the first time. I've self-instructed a couple of times, but that was the first time I have been instructed to go.
And why did he send you to report this to the lawyer?
Well, he clearly wanted to have himself on the record as not being part of what was basically an agreement to have a meeting in return for investigations. And he wanted to make sure that I and Colonel Vindman were also not part of this as well, because remember there was a corollary to this about not getting involved in domestic politics.
Yes, I understand. And you, of course, did you concur with this concern that Mr. Bolton had?
I did, because July 10th is really the first time that it crystallized for me that there was basically a different channel going on here.
And I think you understand.
A foreign policy channel and a domestic policy channel, and we're not in that other channel.
Right, I think you described it as a political errand, and you were doing national security policy, is how you distinguish those two channels. Is that fair? Right, and so is it fair to say that you felt it was improper what was occurring by Mr. Sondland in the wardroom?
It was improper and it was inappropriate, and we said that in the time, in real time.
And here's my point. If it was improper and you went so far as to report this to the lawyers, what was the nature of your disagreement with Mr. Sondland, who has come here and said he had no idea that Burisma meant Biden's until much, much later than July 10th? And of course, we know that he and Ambassador Volker had a blizzard of interactions with Mr. Giuliani. They were amending statements, proposed statements for the Ukrainian president. This went on all summer. And yet, how is it that you had this disagreement in front of the Ukrainians, sent them out into the hallway? Whoops. At some point, did he ask, I'm just talking about an investigation of corruption generally. What are you getting so worried about?
He didn't put it in that way, and I think from listening to him in his depositions and in what I've read of what he deposed, and he made it very clear that he was surprised that we had some kind of objection. You may remember that in his deposition and when he was here, he actually didn't remember the meeting in the same way.
But I thought you said it was pretty obvious to you. Excuse me.
Well, it was obvious to me, correct.
I thought it was obvious to you that Burisma meant Biden's.
Yes, it was.
And you actually treated that as a pretty easy thing to understand. In fact, Mr. Morrison figured it out with a single Google search. But is it credible to you that Mr. Sondland was completely in the dark about this all summer? I mean, you had an argument about it. Didn't he say what he's so worried about?
It's not credible to me at all that he was oblivious to this.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear your answer.
It is not credible to me that he was oblivious. He did not say Biden's, however, he just said Burisma. He said 2016, and I took it to mean the elections as well as Burisma.
Well, I want to thank you both for your appearance here today. Yield back.
Okay, so she just called Sondland a liar, and he testified yesterday under oath, a million ways to Sunday, that he never equated Burisma with the Bidens. Now we know, he said he only learned this much, much later, after the July 25th phone call. She is testifying about July 10th, 2 weeks before the July 25th phone call. She's testifying about a meeting where John Bolton, in front of the Ukrainians, who obviously now know the whole ruse, which people have testified, the Ukrainians never knew. She's testifying that Bolton sent her to the lawyer, Mr. Eisenberg, to report this because it was extortion, a quid pro quo in Latin.
This is the Randi Rhodes Show. To speak with Randi, dial 561-270-3844. That's 561-270-3844.
Okay, so the last person you heard questioning Dr. Fiona Hill was Sean Patrick Maloney, who's been amazing. Just an amazing lawyer, really, really smart and direct. Raja Krishnamurthy also, who, has been amazing. He's from Illinois, Democrat, obviously. And he was just questioning Dr. Fiona Hill about the smear job that was done on her. The smear job that was done on her by one guilty now, Roger Stone, and Alex Jones on InfoWars, where they called her a deep state operative who was operating at the behest of the Jew, George Soros. Just really sick. So let's just listen to Raja Krishnamurthy.
I believe that he's also of Ukrainian Jewish descent. Would you say that these different theories, these conspiracy theories that have been targeting you, spun in part by folks like Mr. Stone, as well as fueled by Rudy Giuliani and others, basically have a tinge of anti-Semitism to them at least?
Well, certainly when they involve George Soros, they do. I'd just like to point out that in the early 1900s, the Tsarist secret police produced something called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which actually you can still obtain on the internet, and you can buy it actually sometimes in bookshops in Russia and elsewhere. This is the longest running anti-Semitic trope that we have in history. And the trope against Mr. Soros, George Soros, was also created for political purposes. And this is the new Protocols of the Elders of Zion. I'd actually intended to write something about this before I was actually invited to come into the administration because it's an absolute outrage.
I'm sorry you've been kind of wrapped up in these crackpot conspiracy theories. Let me turn to Rudy Giuliani. You became increasingly concerned about Rudy Giuliani's increasing role in Ukraine between January and March of 2019, correct?
That's correct.
And I know you served in the Bush and the Obama administrations. I presume that George Bush's personal lawyer and President Obama's personal lawyers were never, directing or heavily influencing Ukraine policy.
I'm not even sure I know who they were. So the answer is no.
And the concern for having someone like Rudy Giuliani having such a strong influence on American foreign policy is that, basically that policy may be operating not in the best interest of America, but perhaps in the best interest of Rudy Giuliani or his clients or business associates, right?
I think that's correct, and that's, as I said in my deposition on October 14th, that frankly that's what I thought it was at the very beginning when I first heard Mr. Giuliani making these statements.
And some of those associates included indicted folks, Igor Fruman and Lev Parnas, isn't that right?
That's correct.
We have an interesting character in Chicago who's now been indicted. His name is Mr. Firtash, and Mr. Firtash has been indicted for federal bribery charges, another associate of Giuliani, right?
I do know Mr. Firtash, that's correct. I know of him from my work, that's correct.
And the question that we're all asking is whether American foreign policy in Ukraine is potentially being run in their interests and not our own.
It certainly appears that it is being used, that there's a subversion of American foreign policy to push these people's personal interests.
Thank you so much.
Holy crap.
That concludes the member questioning. We'll now go to closing statements. Mr. Nunes, do you have any closing remarks?
Oh, do I have to?
Thank you. I have stressed in these hearings that the whistleblower complaint was merely a pretext for Donald Trump's political opponents to do what they've been trying to do since he was elected, oust the president from office. A brief timeline will illustrate the wide range of extraordinary attacks his administration has faced. I'm going to start in June of 2016, when Donald Trump was just a candidate. On behalf of the Democratic National Committee and the Hillary Clinton campaign, Fusion GPS hires Christopher Steele to write the Steele dossiers, a collection of false allegations attributed to Russian sources claiming that Donald Trump is a Russian agent. Fast forward to January 6th of 2017. FBI Director James Comey briefs President-elect Trump on the Steele dossier. The briefing is leaked to CNN, and soon afterwards, BuzzFeed publishes the dossiers. January 20th, on President Trump's inauguration day, the Washington Post runs a story headlined, quote, "The campaign to impeach Donald Trump has begun." January 30th, 10 days later, the whistleblower's current lawyer tweets, hashtag coup has started, first of many steps.
That's
hashtag rebellion,
he fired
hashtag
Sally
impeachment
Yates that
will
day.
follow immediately. March 22nd, Democrats on this committee falsely declare on national TV that they have more than circumstantial evidence that the Trump campaign colluded with Russia. July 12th, an article of impeachment is filed against President Trump in the House of Representatives. November 15th, Democrats file additional articles of impeachment against President Trump. As you see, this was just in President Trump's first year in office. He was subjected to a coordinated smear operation designed to falsely portray him as a Russian agent, as well as attempts to impeach him. This all occurred before his now infamous call with President Zelensky. In 2018, the attacks continued, often from executive branch officials charged with implementing his policies. On February 2nd, 2018, Intelligence Committee Republicans release a memo revealing that the FBI used fabrications of the Steele dossier to get a warrant to spy on a Trump campaign associate. September 5th, the New York Times prints a column by an anonymous Trump administration official who explains that he and other senior officials are, quote, working diligently from within to frustrate parts of Trump's agenda, unquote. December 7th, James Comey admits to Congress the Steele dossier was unverified before and after the FBI used it to get a warrant to spy on a Trump campaign associate.
I think it was in a footnote.
The Russia hoax continued to be the main focus of attacks going into 2019, but when that entire operation collapsed, a new impeachment pretext had to be found. May 4th, 2019, on national television, a Democratic congressman proclaims, quote, "I'm concerned that if we don't impeach this president, he will get reelected," unquote. July 24th of this year, Special Counsel Robert Mueller testifies to Congress about his report, which debunked the conspiracy theory the Trump campaign associates conspired with Russia to hack the 2016 elections. July 25th, just the very next day, a new anti-Trump operation begins as someone listens to the president's phone call with Ukrainian President Zelensky and leaks the contents to the so-called whistleblower. September 13th, Democrats on this committee take the extraordinary step of issuing a press release related to the whistleblower's complaint. October 2nd, it's revealed that Democratic staff on this committee had contact with the whistleblower before he submitted his complaint to the Inspector General, contradicting Democrat denials that such contact had occurred. October 31st, Halloween, probably the most appropriate day. Democrats in the House of Representatives vote to open an official impeachment inquiry against President Trump. What you've seen in this room over the past 2 weeks is a show trial. The planned result of 3 years of political operations and dirty tricks. Campaigns waged against this president. And like any good show trial, the verdict was decided before the trial ever began. After all, after denouncing the president for years as a Russian agent and a threat to democracy, how could the Democrats not impeach him? If they don't move to overthrow him, it would indicate that they don't really believe their own dire warnings about the threat he poses.
Okay. So that entire timeline is based on the fact that there was a counterintelligence investigation underway before the president was inaugurated. All of our intelligence agencies agreed that Russia interfered in our election. And now we know through Roger Stone that the conspiracy was to not hack together. Oh no. The conspiracy was to use the hacked material to benefit Donald Trump. There were 10 obstruction of justice counts in Volume 2 of the Mueller report, which is why people were talking about impeaching the president. And then on July 24th, when Mueller testified, the very next day, Donald Trump felt vindicated for some weird reason and asked Ukraine to interfere in the 2020 election. So, and the coup thing, that had to do with firing Sally Yates.
Clear for the Randi Rhodes Show. Turn up your mind.
Okay, because we had to suffer through Devin Nunes's, crazy conspiracy theories, I thought that we should listen to Adam Schiff's closing remarks together.
Anyone watching these proceedings, anyone reading the deposition transcripts would have the same impression that you evidently had from hearing my colleagues talk about the Russia hoax, that the whole idea that Russia had gotten involved in the 2016 election was a hoax put out by the Democrats. And of course, they're not alone in pushing out this idea. It is trumpeted by no one other than the President of the United States, who almost on a daily basis at times would comment and tweet and propagate the idea that Russia's interference in our election was a hoax. And of course, we all remember that debacle in Helsinki when the president stood next to Vladimir Putin and questioned his own intelligence agencies. I wish I had heard just some of the righteous indignation we heard in the committee today when the president questioned that fundamental conclusion of our intelligence agencies. But of course, they were silent when the president said that. They'll show indignation today, but they will cower when they hear the president questioning the very conclusions that our intelligence community has reached. But we saw something interesting also today. My colleagues sought to use you, Dr. Hill, to besmirch the character of Colonel Vindman. And I thought this was very interesting. It certainly wasn't unexpected, but it was very interesting for this reason. They didn't really question anything Colonel Vindman said. After all, what Colonel Vindman said is what you said. He was in that July 10th meeting. He heard the same quid pro quo, the same comments by Sondland. If you want this meeting, Ukrainians, and we have an agreement about this, you gotta announce you're gonna do these investigations. They heard the same quid pro quo that you did. So why are they smearing him? Mr. Holmes, you testified just as Vindman said, Colonel Vindman said, that he warned Zelensky about getting involved in U.S. politics. They don't question that. They didn't take issue with that. So why smear this Purple Heart recipient? Just like the smear of Ambassador Yovanovitch, it's just gratuitous. They don't question the facts. It's just gratuitous. The attack on you, Mr. Holmes, that you were indiscreet in mentioning this conversation to others. Well, I think you're quite right. The indiscretion is when an ambassador to the EU calls the president on an insecure line in a country known for Russian telecommunications and eavesdropping. That's more than indiscretion. That's a security risk. But why attack you, Mr. Holmes? They didn't question anything you said. They didn't question what conversation you overheard. Ambassador Sondland, indeed, didn't question what you said. He acknowledged that the one thing the president wanted to know the day after that conversation with Zelensky was, is he going to do the investigations? And Sondland said, yes, he'll do anything you ask. They don't question that. So why attack you? They didn't question your testimony when you said, and I think you asked, Ambassador Sondland, does Donald Trump give a blank, and I would like to use the word here, about Ukraine? And he said, he doesn't give a blank about Ukraine. He only cares about the big stuff. And you said, well, there's some big stuff here. Ukraine's at war with Russia. That's kind of big stuff. And his answer was, no, 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 no. He cares about the big stuff that matters to him, his personal interests, like the Biden investigation that Giuliani wants. I mean, one question posed by your testimony, Mr. Holmes, is what do we care about? Do we care about the big stuff, like the Constitution, like an oath of office, or do we only care now about party? What do we care about? But let's go beyond your testimony today. Let's look at the bigger picture. What do we know now after these depositions, these secret depositions? Now, people watching at home might not know that in these secret depositions, which apparently no one else is allowed to hear, no members are allowed to participate, it's just secret apparently, sounds like it's just me and the witness, only over 100 members of Congress are able to participate in those secret depositions. And the minority was just so unable to participate, they got the same time they got in these open hearings. It was the same format. That was the secret star chamber that you've been hearing so much about. So what have we learned through these depositions and through the testimony? Because so much of this is really undisputed. We learned that a dedicated public servant named Marie Yovanovitch, known for fighting corruption, widely respected throughout the diplomatic corps, was ruthlessly smeared by Rudy Giuliani, by the president's own son, by their friends on Fox Primetime, and a whole host of other characters. Her reputation was sullied so they could get her out of the way, which they did. And you're right, it was gratuitous. The president could have gotten rid of her anytime he wanted, but that's not enough for this president. No, he has to smear and destroy those that get in his way. And someone fighting corruption in Ukraine was getting in his way. So she's gone. She's gone. And this makes way almost immediately thereafter. She leaves, the three amigos come in. The three amigos, two of whom never made the connection that Burisma means Biden. It took Tim Morrison all of 30 seconds on Google to figure that out. But we're to believe, I guess, that in all the companies in all the world, that Rudy Giuliani just happens to be interested in this one? That's absurd. The interest, of course, was in an investigation of Donald Trump's rival, the one that he apparently feared the most. And they were willing to do whatever was necessary to get Ukraine to do that dirty work, to do that political investigation. And so it began. We're not going to set up a phone call until you make certain commitments. That was Ambassador Sondland's testimony. The first quid pro quo was actually just getting on the phone with President Trump. And then there was the quid pro quo involving the White House meeting. And witness after witness, and none of my colleagues contested this, talked about just how important that meeting was to the president of Ukraine and why they're at war with Russia. And their most important ally is the United States. And the most important person in the United States for that relationship is the President of the United States. And if President Zelensky can show that he has a good relationship with the President of the United States, it means to his people that this new president has the support of their most important patron, and it means to the Russians that we have their back. This president, this new president who is negotiating with a far superior power that has invaded his country, is going into negotiation with Putin over how to resolve this conflict. Whether he has good leverage or lousy leverage depends on whether the Russians think he has a relationship with the president. And the president wouldn't give him that, not without getting something in return. Wouldn't give him that official act, that White House meeting, without getting something in return. And that return was investigations of his rival that would help his reelection. An official act or something of clear value and something very important. The big stuff, as Sondland explained to you, Mr. Holmes.
Wow, he's on a roll, man. This man can manage facts in a way that very few people can manage facts. I love that about him. That is incredible. Okay, so I want to hear the rest of his close because he's laying out the case, the whole case, the case that was testified to under oath, not the fantasy case that is in Devin Nunes and Jim Jordan and Mike Turner's head, where they don't contest, they don't object to anything the witnesses have testified to. They just sit there and speechify and push out a false narrative that they prefer.
All things Randi at RandiRhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, the Randi Rhodes Show.
All right, save this podcast, okay? Here's Adam Schiff's closing.
To help his campaign. Now, we also heard abundant testimony about the other quid pro quo, the withholding of security assistance, which no one can explain. There's no debate among my colleagues. Everyone in the NSC, in the State Department, the Defense Department, everyone supported this, everyone. All the reviews that needed to be done to make sure that Ukraine was meeting its anti-corruption standards had been done. And they had found to meet the criteria, the aid should have been released, but it was withheld, and no one could understand or get a clear explanation for why, until it became clear to everyone. It's all about the investigations. It's all about the leverage. And if there was any doubt about it, the man closest to the president, who meets with him every day, Mick Mulvaney, erased all doubt. You're darn right. Yes, we talked about the 2016 election investigation. And yes, this was in the context of holding up the military aid. And, you know, just get used to it, or just get over it, or whatever it was he said. Because that's how we roll. Those are my words, not his. But that's the import. Yeah, there's going to be politics, and just get over it. Well, if we care about the big stuff, we can't just get over it. Now, my colleagues have had a lot of defenses to all of this evidence, which has piled up day after day after day, and it's amazing. They hear you testify, Mr. Holmes, that it was clear that the security assistance was being withheld. It was clear to all of the Americans. It was clear to the Ukrainians. You testified the Ukrainians felt pressure. They still feel pressure to this day. And what did my colleagues say in the same hearing? I mean, I guess they're not listening. The Ukrainians felt no pressure. There's no evidence they felt pressure, which gets into their next defense, which is, it's all hearsay. It's all hearsay. Now, most of my colleagues, I guess, are not lawyers. Lawyers out there understand just how wrong they are about what hearsay is, but let's just discuss this in terms that all people can understand. The impression they would have you take from it's all hearsay is because we in this committee were not in that wardroom with you, Dr. Hill. We were not in that meeting earlier with Dr. Bolton, that because we're not in the room, it's all hearsay. After all, you're relating what you heard and you're saying it, so it must be hearsay, and therefore we don't really have to think about it, do we? We don't have to consider that you have direct evidence that this meeting in the White House was being withheld because the president wanted these meetings, these investigations. We can't accept that. Well, if that were true, you could never present any evidence in court unless the jury was also in the wardroom. That's absurd. They don't accept the documentary evidence, all the text messages about quid pro quos, and are we really saying, and that's crazy, and if my worst nightmare is the Russians will get it and I'll quit. They don't accept the documents, the few documents that we have from the State Department that weren't produced, by the way, by the State Department, where Sondland communicates directly with the Secretary of State about this investigative interest of the president. And they don't accept the documents either. I guess the documents are also hearsay. Now, it might be a little more convincing if they were joining us in demanding that the documents be produced, but of course they're not. And we know why not. Because the documents are like that one we saw on the screen. They implicate others, including Secretary Pompeo. So of course, Donald Trump and Secretary Pompeo don't want us to see those documents. But apparently it's all hearsay. Even when you actually hear the president, Mr. Holmes, that's hearsay. We can't rely on people saying what the president said. Apparently we can only rely on what the president says, and there, we shouldn't even rely on that either. We shouldn't really rely on what the president said in the call record. We should imagine he said something else. We should imagine he said something about actually fighting corruption, instead of what he actually said, which was, I want you to do us a favor, though. I want you to look into this 2016 CrowdStrike conspiracy theory, and I want you to look into the Bidens. I guess we're not even supposed to rely on that because that's hearsay. Well, that's absurd. That would be like saying you can't rely on the testimony of the burglars during Watergate because it's only hearsay. Or you can't consider the fact that they tried to break in because they got caught. They actually didn't get what they came for, so, you know, kind of no harm, no foul. That's absurd. That's absurd. But the other defense, besides it failed, the scheme failed, they got caught, the other defense is the president denies it. Well, I guess that's case closed, right? The president says, really quite spontaneously, it's not as if he was asked in this way, no quid pro quo. What do you want from Ukraine? No quid pro quo. This is the I'm not a crook defense. You say it, and I guess that's the end of it. Well, the only thing we can say is that it's not so much that this situation is different in terms of Nixon's conduct and Trump's conduct. What we've seen here is far more serious than a third-rate burglary of the Democratic headquarters. What we're talking about here is the withholding of recognition in that White House meeting, the withholding of military aid to an ally at war. That is beyond anything Nixon did. The difference between then and now is not the difference between Nixon and Trump. It's the difference between that Congress and this one. And so we are asking, where is Howard Baker? Where is Howard Baker? Where are the people who are willing to go beyond their party, to look to their duty? I was struck by Colonel Vinsman's testimony because he said that he acted out of duty. What is our duty here? That's what we need to be asking, not using metaphors about balls and strikes or our team and your team. I've heard my colleagues use those metaphors. This should be about duty. What is our duty?
This is incredible. He is an amazing, amazing human being. He's not even reading notes, okay? And I want you to save this podcast. I really do. Because this is the testimony that was sworn to, that he is recounting for you, in order that you understand that we are a nation of laws. This is not about party. This is not about politics. This is about lawlessness and criminal behavior that has been testified to by career professionals and even Donald Trump's own hand-picked witnesses. They all agree.
Fatality. Call in, connect. To speak to Randi, call 561-270-3844. 561-270-3844.
All right, I don't think there's very much more left of Adam Schiff's closing, but this was important.
We are, and this gets to Mr. Heck's point, we are the indispensable nation. We still are. People look to us from all over the world. Journalists from their jail cells in Turkey, the victims of mass extrajudicial killing in the Philippines, people who gathered in Tahrir Square wanting a representative government, people in China who are Uyghurs, people in Ukraine who want a better future. They look to us. They're not going to look to the Russians. They're not going to look to the Chinese. They can't look to Europe with all its problems. They still look to us, and increasingly they don't recognize what they see. Because what they see is Americans saying, don't engage in political prosecutions. And what they say back is, oh, you mean like the Bidens and the Clintons that you want us to investigate? What they see, they don't recognize. And that is a terrible tragedy for us, but it's a greater tragedy for the rest of the world. Now, I happen to think that when the founders provided a mechanism in the Constitution for impeachment, they were worried about what might happen if someone unethical took the highest office in the land and used it for their personal gain and not because of deep care about the big things that should matter, like our national security and our defense and our allies and what the country stands for. I happen to think that's why they put that remedy in the Constitution. And I think we need to consult our conscience and our constituents and decide whether that remedy is appropriate here, whether that remedy is necessary here. And as you know, notwithstanding what my colleague said, I resisted going down this path for a long time, but I will tell you why I could resist no more. And it came down to this. It came down to timing. It came down to the fact that the day after Bob Mueller testified, that Donald Trump invited Russian interference. Hey, Russia, if you're listening, come get Hillary's emails. And later that day, they tried to hack her server. The day after he testified that not only did Trump invite that interference, but that he welcomed the help in the campaign, they made full use of it, they lied about it, they obstructed the investigation into it, and all this is in his testimony and his report. The day after that, Donald Trump is back on the phone asking another nation to involve itself in another U.S. election. That says to me, this president believes he is above the law, beyond accountability. And in my view, there is nothing more dangerous than an unethical president who believes they are above the law. And I would just say to people watching here at home and around the world. In the words of my great colleague, we are better than that. Adjourned.
That just shakes me. That sends a chill down my spine. And anybody who understands what America is, anybody who understands that we are a nation of law, that we are a democracy that seeks to spread peace and democracy around the world, and that we use our diplomatic corps and we use all of these people that you met, most Americans don't even have any idea how many people there are inside the State Department, the Pentagon, or any of the National Security Council, the National Security Agency. I don't think people understand how professional and how smart and how dedicated to duty and honor and upholding the ideals and principles of America and American democracy and spreading the rule of law as far and wide as we can without ever having to shoot a shot, without ever. Do you think that the Berlin Wall fell because Ronald Reagan stood there and said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall? No, I can't even explain to you how much work went into that, and that by the time Ronald Reagan said that, he knew that he had an agreement. I mean, this was a great civics lesson for people who don't trust that the government is necessary, or don't believe in diplomacy, or think the State Department is some cushy job for, less than, presidential people. I hope everybody can appreciate just how brilliant and how professional and how dedicated our Foreign Service officers are, and how willing this particular Congress is. And I've never seen one full of such doofuses. I have never seen anybody dumber than Devin Nunes wield a gavel as a committee chairman, now a ranking member, but a committee chairman. I have never seen anybody as willing to lie as Jim Jordan. I have never seen a party, either party, made up of people who are trying to distort and distract and lie to the American people to protect either themselves or this president who they are afraid of will primary them, or what it is. Maybe it's the money. I don't know. I know Donald Trump is meeting with senators right freaking now, offering them dollars for obstructing, what needs to happen here, which is his removal. I know today he's meeting with Mitt Romney. He's meeting with Susan Collins. We all know he's giving money to their campaigns. Tomorrow he'll meet with more of them to buy their loyalty. This is just, I don't know. I've never seen anything quite like this that called itself a party. I've never seen any political party in the United States do what this particular Republican Party is doing. That's why when Adam Schiff started saying, where is Howard Baker? And, where are the people that would walk over to the White House and say, this is over. You have to resign. You got caught. You got caught. You got caught not faithfully executing the laws of the United States. You got caught bribing Ukraine for your own personal benefit. You got caught taking foreign money and foreign help, and you got caught welcoming it. You got caught obstructing justice by Bob Mueller, and we were going to leave it alone. The Democrats were going to leave it alone. They were going to walk away from 10 counts of obstruction of justice, which would have been, wrong, but they were going to. And they were going to let elections take place. But no. You had to go the next day and do it all over again. You had to go to another foreign country and do it all over again. And then you confessed on TV and you said maybe even China ought to insert themselves into our elections. And then your secretary of your OMB director and your acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, confessed on TV and said, yeah, we did it. So what? Get used to it. It's over. Where are those people?
This is the Randi Rhodes Show. To speak with Randi, dial 561-270-3844. That's 561-270-3844.
Here's what the president took away from all of that testimony, from all of it, from the fact that every witness, including his handpicked people, testified that there was a quid pro quo. In fact, there were many quid pro quos. That his own OMB director and his own acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, confessed on TV. That the testimony today was that Bolton said this was a drug deal and it was going to blow up, and Fiona Hill testified that that Giuliani and this whole channel was put on, and Sondland were put on a political errand. And here we were trying to be involved in national security and national foreign policy. And she said, this whole thing, she said to Ambassador Sondland, I think this is all going to blow up. Everybody's like saying the same damn thing. But here's what the president took away from all of that. Oh, no. Oh, well. Yeah, it's froze. He's standing on the White House lawn saying no quid pro quo. No quid pro quo, no quid pro quo. I'm sorry, but, everybody testified. In fact, Gordon Sondland said specifically, yes, there was a quid pro quo. And let me explain to you what Gordon Sondland did. Gordon Sondland did what what judges do. He split the baby. What do I mean by that? So Gordon Sondland testified that the entire administration, every single person knew what was going on. They all knew about the quid pro quo. He said that Mulvaney knew, that Rick Perry knew, that's Secretary of Energy, obviously. I mean, he said everybody knew on July 10th. Obviously, John Bolton knew because Sondland said it in a meeting in front of Fiona Hill, in front of Bolton, who ended the meeting because the Ukrainians were there. So, of course, even they knew, which is the talking point for the Republicans. By the way, all of the talking points of the Republicans, every defense that they have laid out, has all been buried in the giant graveyard of lies that is the Republican Party these days, which is really freaking sad. Okay, but Tim Morrison testified there was a quid pro quo. Sondland testified there was a quid pro quo. Fiona Hill testified there was a quid pro quo that was said in front of the Ukrainians. It's just unbelievable. And the president stood on the lawn today and said, no quid pro quo, no. Seriously, this is what we're trying to protect ourselves against. A man who does that. That is sick and it's twisted. But, listen, I guess everybody's first reaction to being caught doing something illegal or doing something, that could be ticketed even, is to say, no, officer, I didn't know how fast I was going. Or I didn't rob the bank, right? Just like they were offering. But this is incredible because they've already taken the testimony of all the witnesses who said he's lying. He's lying. And we cannot have a person who doesn't consider his oath of office, his duty as the commander-in-chief or the president of the United States, to be big stuff. He considers his own reelection to be bigger than your life, than your freedom, than our national security and our integrity around the world. He considers himself more important than anything that affects you, anything at all. And he just stands there and lies to you. Oh, I got this healthcare plan. It's going to be bigger and better and cheaper and more. Where is it? Oh, we're going to do infrastructure. Where is it? Oh, Mexico's going to pay for the wall. Where's the check? None of these things have happened. None of them. He's riding on Obama's coattails. And by the way, there was plenty of testimony that Obama didn't just give blankets, okay? That's just ridiculous. That we gave the reason why, and Fiona Hill testified today, and this was very clear, the reason why we were not, and she was not, and a lot of people inside the national security apparatus, the ambassador, the State Department, the Department of Defense, were not for selling lethal weapons to Ukraine, although I'll tell you in a second what we did give them, was because their military was in no position to accept technology because they weren't trained to use any of it. And they thought that that would be a terrible thing to transfer weapons, lethal weapons to them when their army was hollowed out and was untrained. And so what we did give, what Obama did give, was we trained tons and tons and tons of Ukrainian soldiers. We gave them all the training so that they could operate the Javelin missile system. We gave them all night vision goggles. We gave them, radars. We gave them all kinds of things to protect themselves. We just wouldn't transfer the technology without the training. So once the Department of Defense certified that anti-corruption benchmarks had been met and that training had occurred, that is when we green-lighted the release of lethal weapons. And President Trump knew that. And still he accused Ukraine of not doing anti-corruption effort, or not taking any corruption efforts, and said Obama only gave blankets. These are all lies. Every last bit of it is a lie. It's I can't. Here, last night, Laura Cooper, who was, she's from the Department of Defense, she testified about the benchmarks.
This president as a champion of anti-corruption. Your testimony today is that on May 23, you certified that as far as it related to your duties, Ukraine had met the corruption concerns for the aid to be released. Is that right?
Sir, the Defense Department certified.
And after that date, inexplicably, the President of the United States puts a hold on security assistance. Is that right?
That was what I heard in July, yes.
Now, this anti-corruption president who cares so much about rooting out corruption in Ukraine, did he ever call you after he put the hold to say, Ms. Cooper, what's going on in Ukraine?
No, sir.
Okay, so you didn't care about corruption. Let's fast forward to what Laura Cooper from the Department of Defense testified that the Obama administration gave to Ukraine.
The justification is that the Obama administration only provided blankets, so the Ukrainians should be grateful, even after being shaken down, that the Trump administration provided more. But the truth, Ms. Cooper, is that under the Obama administration and the European Reassurance Initiative, $175 million were provided from U.S. taxpayer dollars to the Ukrainians. Is that right?
Sir, I don't have that figure. The figure that we typically use is to say we've provided $1.6 billion to date.
Oh, my God.
But I don't have the breakdown in front of me.
And the Obama administration also trained 5 military battalions of the Ukrainians. Is that correct?
Again, I don't have the figures in front of me, but yes, the training program began in the Obama administration, and we did train many forces.
And under the Obama administration founded Ukrainian Security Assistance Initiative, provided to the Ukrainians were armored Humvees, tactical drones, night vision devices, armored vests, and medical equipment. Is that correct?
These all sound like pieces of equipment that were provided in the Obama administration, to my recollection.
You'd agree that's a lot more than blankets, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, there's that. And now let's combine it with Fiona Hill's testimony about the Ukrainians not being trained well enough to take the Javelin missiles in 2015, but in 2017, she knows that they're now ready.
The Trump administration changed courses from its predecessor and provided lethal defensive assistance to the Ukraine. Were you in favor of arming the Ukrainians with the Javelins?
I was not initially in 2015 before I joined the government, and I'm sure that many people on the committee have seen that I wrote an opinion piece with a colleague at the Brookings Institution in that juncture, because I was very worried at that particular point in time that the Ukrainian military was not in a fit state to really take on board sophisticated weapons, be they defensive or offensive weapons. And I worried that there was not a long-term sustainable plan given the overwhelming force that the Russians could apply against the Ukrainians. However, when I came into government in 2017 and started to interact with all of my colleagues in the Pentagon, and you had Laura Cooper here yesterday,
right,
I realised, in fact, that there'd been an awful lot of work done on this, and that there was a clear and consistent plan for the sustainability long-term of the Ukrainian military. So I changed my mind.
There you have it. Wasn't blankets. It was training so that they could get trained on technology, lethal technology, the Javelin weapon system. Listen, everything that you've been told by Republicans, where they don't even ask a question, they don't dispute the testimony, they just speechify, and they just lay out conspiracy theories, debunked ones, by the way. is a lie? What if everything you ever heard from Jim Jordan, Devin Nunes, Mike Turner, Mike Conaway, what if everything Lindsey Graham has said to you about Donald Trump post-inauguration was a lie? Well, I got news for you. It all was. Tomorrow's Friday, thank God.
Imagination. Randi Rhodes Show. Turn up your mind.
It's Friday, you bastards. I want to start here because 56 years ago today, this man was brutally assassinated in Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas, and Donald Trump still thinks that he is the president who's been treated the worst. And I also want to start here because that's how old the argument for Medicare for all is. 56 years ago.
The Constitution of the United States did not make the President or the Congress powerless. It gave them definite responsibilities to advance the general welfare, and that is what we're attempting to do. And then I read that this bill will sap the individual self-reliance of Americans. I can't imagine anything worse or anything better to sap someone's self-reliance than to be sick, alone, broke, or to have saved for a lifetime and put it out in a week, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months. This argument that the government should stay out, that it saps our pioneer stock. I used to hear that argument when we were talking about raising the minimum wage to $1.25.
Oh, my God.
The fact of the matter is, what saps anyone's self-reliance is working 60 hours at straight time, or working at 85 or 95 or $1 an hour. In England, the entire cost of medicine for people of all ages, all of it, doctors, the choice of doctors, hospitals, from the time you're born to the time you die, are included in a government program. We are now talking about doing most of the countries of Europe did years ago.
Oh, my God.
The British did it 30 years ago. We are behind every country pretty nearly in Europe in this matter of medical care for our citizens.
There you have it. 56 years ago. 56 years ago, okay? That is unbelievable. Here's about 12 years ago. Just a little refresher for people who can't remember recent history. Which one is Obama? 70. Oh, my God, I had it at 60.
It's harder for young people to save for a rainy day, let alone retirement. So Democrats aren't just running on good old ideas like a higher minimum wage. They're running on good new ideas like Medicare for all, giving workers seats on corporate boards, reversing the most egregious corporate tax cuts to make sure college students graduate debt-free.
Nothing new under the sun. See what I mean? And then, of course, you had...
I have a plan for Medicare for all, and I'm proud that it's the first health care plan by anyone in this presidential primary that lays out the full cost and how to pay for it. And here's the deal. It doesn't raise middle-class taxes by 1 penny, not 1 penny. If we make no other changes over the next 10 years, Americans will reach into their pockets and pay out about $11 trillion on insurance premiums, co-pays, deductibles, and uncovered medical expenses.
Okay, get the idea, get the general drift. So we can chew bubble gum and walk at the same time. We Democrats can. These are really old ideas that every time they're brought up, Republicans find an argument about you need to pull yourself up from your bootstraps. You need to be self-reliant. And no one can think of anything that saps the American energy, that saps the American potential, other than, working for a minimum wage that does not pay the bills. Getting killed by medical expenses, getting wiped out for long-term care, which Medicare does not cover when you're, in your last final years, and maybe your balance is gone, or, you can't take a shower without somebody being in the house because you're afraid you'll fall. You know what I'm saying? So I just thought we would give a shout out to JFK 56 years ago. You can go even further back if you want to hear arguments for Medicare for all. You can go back to Truman. You could keep on going. All right. Now our job is to show you the alternative universe that we currently live in. Not only are we not likely to make any progress in the near future because of the Republican Party and their sick desire to serve corporate America, their sick desire to see Americans weakened, to see them work for less than what they're worth, to see them, be ripped apart by conspiracy theories and propaganda and all this. But they actually want to have you live in an alternative universe so that they can, A, have their way with you, B, defend the indefensible, because they have no exculpatory evidence for the witnesses that we heard testify under oath in the past couple of weeks. Okay, they have nothing. They have no defense. I mean, Lindsey Graham tried, his defense was Trump was too stupid to do it, right?
What I can tell you about the Trump policy toward the Ukraine, it was incoherent. It depends on who you talk to. They seem to be incapable of forming a quid pro quo. So, no, I find the whole process to be a sham, and I'm not going to legitimize it.
So that was his defense. Donald Trump is too stupid to, A, form a policy for Ukraine, and B, to pull off a quid pro quo. Well, I'll agree with he couldn't pull it off. He got caught. But I just want to show you what an alternative universe we live in, okay? These two clips ought to say it all for you. This is just the most bizarre thing I've experienced in my life, okay? Here's Adam Schiff, okay, closing one day of the hearings.
Now, my Republican colleagues, all they seem to be upset about with this is not that the president sought an investigation of his political rival, not that he withheld a White House meeting and $400 million in aid we all passed on a bipartisan basis to pressure Ukraine to do those investigations. Their objection is he got caught. Their objection is that someone blew the whistle. And they would like this whistleblower identified. And the president wants this whistleblower punished. That's their objection. Not that the president engaged in this conduct, but that he got caught. Their defense is, well, he ended up releasing the aid. Yes, after he got caught.
Okay. So, and then here's Devin Nunes yesterday.
For the last 3 years, it's not President Trump who got caught. It's the Democrats who got caught.
Oh, my God.
They got caught falsely claiming they had more than circumstantial evidence that Trump colluded with Russians to hack the 2016 election.
We never said they hacked together.
They got caught.
He welcomed it.
Orchestrating this entire farce with the whistleblower and lying about their secret meetings with him.
Oh, my God.
They got caught defending the false allegations of the Steele dossier, which was paid for by them.
No one defended it.
They got caught breaking their promise that impeachment would only go forward with bipartisan support because of how damaging it is to the American people. They got caught running a sham impeachment process featuring secret depositions, hidden transcripts, and an unending flood of Democrat leaks to the media.
Except none of that happened. As you know, the Republicans yesterday, when questioning witnesses and all the previous hearing days, said, I asked you in your deposition. The depositions were released publicly. There was no dungeon. There was no star chamber. There was no secret. Listen, these people are shameless. You know why? You know why? Because if Trump goes down for failure to uphold the Constitution, then the entire grand old pervert party is dead. That's why. It would be the end of the GOP for at least decades to come. And they would rather save their party than save this democracy.
All things Randy at RandyRhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, The Randi Rhodes Show.
Alrighty, everybody. We are in our second pledge drive as a show that is on Free Speech TV. It began yesterday. I neglected to tell you about it. So let me just tell you, operators are standing by to take your cash. 877-378-8669 is the number you can call. 877-378-8669. This is to support our platform on Free Speech TV, where you can watch us on Dish 9415. We're on DirecTV 348. We're on Sling and Roku and Apple, thanks to the hard work that the people in Denver, Colorado at Free Speech TV do every single day. For this particular fundraiser, we have come up with some gifty little gifts for you. Of course, $20 will send you a Randi Rhodes Show, a bumper sticker. If you want a hat signed by me, $150 will get you one of those. My personal favorites this time are the two T-shirts we created for you and your enjoyment. One is just a Lock 'em Up T-shirt. It's a hashtag Lock 'em Up T-shirt. And the other one that is my personal favorite, Deep State University Debate Team. That's who we are, everybody. Deep State University Debate Team, okay? And that's $120. We'll send that off to you, okay? So please do dial or visit freespeech.org/donate. All right. I want to explain to you what I'm going to show you now. This is the alternative universe, okay? This is in spite of facts, in spite of truth, in spite of oaths, in spite of testimony, in spite of direct evidence, in spite of all of it, how the president and his protectors, his soldiers, his capos, whatever you want to call them, okay, his good fellows, his stupid fellows, whatever, are protecting a party by protecting this president, because they understand that with him goes the Republican Party and it will never be in power, at least for the next 20 years. They get that, and that's why they're willing to lie so boldly. So let's do this little portion here that I think is, just so illustrative of, what happened here, okay? Here is Ambassador Sondland saying, yes, there is a quid pro quo.
These emails show that the leadership of the State Department, the National Security Council, and the White House were all informed about the Ukraine efforts from May 23rd, 2019, until the security aid was released on September 11th, 2019. I will quote from some of those messages with you shortly. Fourth, as I testified previously, Mr. Giuliani's requests were a quid pro quo for arranging a White House visit for President Zelensky. Mr. Giuliani demanded that Ukraine make a public statement announcing the investigations of the 2016 election, DNC server, and Burisma.
Okay. Yesterday, after all this testimony, after these 2 weeks, here's Kevin McCarthy.
Well, I think it's very clear there was no quid pro quo. I think if you look at Sondland and the length of the interview, I would sum it up with one individual asking him questions, Congressman Mike Turner. He asked him, "Is anybody on the planet tell you in the process there had to be a quid pro quo or anything with holding up the aid?" He said no.
Because in Republican world, unless you say, hey, Sondland, go execute a quid pro quo, which obviously the president didn't know what that was. He just knows a shakedown. He just knows extortion. He just knows corruption. He knows how to do it. He knows how to task people with doing it. And he knows how to, or he thinks he knows how to be above the law. So that's just amazing. You had testimony, yes, there was a quid pro quo. Not only did you have testimony that there was a quid pro quo, but you had testimony that everybody knew about it.
You've testified that the White House meeting that President Zelensky desperately wanted, and that was very important to President Zelensky, was it not?
Absolutely.
You've testified that that meeting was a quid pro quo for what the president wanted, these 2 investigations. Is that right?
Correct.
And that everybody knew it?
Correct.
This is painful. Okay. And here's Donald Trump.
There was no quid pro quo. There was nothing.
Did he also mention to me in the past the corruption related to the DNC server? Absolutely. No question about that.
There was no quid pro quo at all.
To be clear, what you just described is a quid pro quo. We do that all the time with foreign policy.
There was no quid pro quo, unlike Biden.
That's it. And that's why we held up the money.
Here's testimony from a Trump witness. Now, Trump lied this morning. I don't know if you saw his unhinged interview, because most of us do not pay attention to that propaganda channel, but he did a 55-minute interview this morning with Fox and Friends. We'll get to it. But here you have Mick Mulvaney saying there was a quid pro quo. You have Gordon Sondland saying there was a quid pro quo. You have testimony that everybody in the White House knew that there was extortion, there was a bribe, there was a quid pro quo. He named names. He did. He said Mulvaney. He said Pompeo. He said Rudy Giuliani. He said Rick Perry. Everybody knew. Ambassador Volker testified. He knew. Vindman knew. Everybody knew. Everybody knew. Lindsey Graham is sticking with he's just too stupid to do it.
What I can tell you about the Trump policy toward the Ukraine, it was incoherent. It depends on who you talk to.
No.
They seem to be incapable of forming a quid pro quo.
Okay. They're just too stupid. Here is the Republicans' witness, Tim Morrison.
And what did Ambassador Sondland tell you that he told Mr. Yermak?
That the Ukrainians would have to have the prosecutor general make a statement with respect to the investigations as a condition of having the aid lifted.
That's their witness. They wanted Tim Morrison. They wanted Ambassador Kurt Volker. Those are the Republican witnesses. I know this because idiot boy Nunes wrote a letter to Adam Schiff requesting these 2 Republican witnesses. And even they blew up the story. Okay, even they did. But that did not stop Donald Trump from going on the TV this morning and say, well, see, now apparently, He didn't know Gordon Sondland, but Gordon Sondland testified that he had talked to Donald Trump 20 times, that they were so familiar with each other that they both used 4-letter words. They used, all kinds of, yeah, it's something I said, it's something I would say, right? But Trump went on the TV this morning to let us know that Sondland is a never-Trumper Hillary supporter.
By the way, check out his lawyers. They're Hillary Clinton lawyers. This guy has Hillary Clinton lawyers. They're Democrats.
Sondland.
But he's sitting there, Sondland, yeah. He's sitting there with Clinton lawyers. They're passing him notes all the time. And he didn't put the most important phrase in his 22-page statement that he read. The most important phrase was, I want nothing. Twice I said it. I want nothing. I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo.
He said that on September 9th, the day that the congressional investigation started.
Call in, connect. To speak to Randi, call 561-270-3844. 561-270-3844.
Perfect example of a bribe.
And in fact, you had a discussion, communication with the Secretary of State in which you said that logjam over aid could be lifted if Zelensky announced these investigations, right?
I don't recall saying the logjam over aid. I recall saying the logjam. I don't know that.
That's what you meant, right, Ambassador?
I meant that whatever was holding up the meeting, whatever was holding up our deal with Ukraine, I was trying to break. Again, I was presuming.
Well, here's what you said in your testimony a moment ago.
Okay.
Page 18. But my goal at the time was to do what was necessary to get the aid released, to break the logjam. Okay, that's still your testimony, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the military aid is also an official act, am I right?
Yes.
This is not President Trump's personal bank account he's writing a check from. This is $400 million of U.S. taxpayer money, is it not?
Absolutely.
and there was a logjam in which the president would not write that U.S. check, you believed, until Ukraine announced these 2 investigations the president wanted, correct?
That was my belief.
Mr. Goldman.
Okay. All right. Here's the President of the United States of America.
And let me tell you, it's a hoax, it's a disgrace, it's an embarrassment to our country. Nancy Pelosi has done a terrible job as Speaker. There's never been a Speaker that's done so little. And she's totally incompetent. And Schiff, he stands up and he tells lies all day long, and even with that. So we have no due process. We can't have anything. And yet, not only did we win today, it's over. And some of the fair press, of which there isn't too much, said this thing is over.
This thing is over. Nancy Pelosi is a failure.
The evidence is clear that the president has used his office for his own personal gain, and in doing so undermined the national security of the United States by withholding military assistance to the Ukraine to the benefit of the Russians, that he has undermined the integrity of our elections by what he has done. Again, the Russian interference being ignored by him. And third, he has violated his oath of office.
And so here is Donald Trump early this morning on the Fox and Friends propaganda television show.
But I have to deal with crazy Nancy. I mean, she's crazy as a bedbug. She is nuts. And what she's doing, and she's not talented, she's highly overrated. All she's doing is sitting. She's not doing any work for the people. And now it turns out that the whole impeachment thing is a scam.
Gotcha. So,
and now on top of it, now you're starting to get some feedback that the IG report is coming out, and I think that will be
explosive.
The greatest political scandal in the history of our country.
Okay, so Nancy Pelosi is crazy. He has to deal with her. She's crazy as a bed bug. She gets nothing done. All right. Bills and resolutions. I don't want to go through the whole list, but I will tell you the very first one was For the People Act. That was to get money out of politics. It was also to give us paper ballots so that we could do recounts. It was also same-day registration, everything to do with voting, all right? We had an assault weapons ban of 2019. That's 66. We had H.R. 420, which is an interesting number for regulating marijuana like alcohol. Okay, that's H.R. 420, everybody. They're not stupid. They get it. We had H.R. 8, which was a comprehensive gun safety piece of legislation, Bipartisan Background Checks Act of 2019, H.R. 5, the Equality Act, H.R. 38, Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act. We had the assault weapons ban I mentioned, Medicare for All Act, that's H.R. 1384. These are all passed. Okay? Not only do we have H.R. 8, we had H.R. 1112. We had the Vaccination of All Children Act, H.R. 2527. We had a prescription drug bill to lower the price of prescription drugs for the Medicare program, right, for seniors, so that the government would now have the right to negotiate the cost of that Medicare. The government single-payer program for our seniors would pay for prescription drugs. We had H.R. 6, which was for the Dreamers. That was the DACA Act, making it official that they had the protections. We actually had a resolution, HJ Res 20, which was term limits. Yeah, term limits for members of Congress, and on and on and on and on. There were, in the last session, and the Democrats have only had control of Congress since 2019 because, you know, we voted in 2018. They were sworn in 2019, right? They passed 250 pieces of legislation. The president is lying. Obviously, it's all he does. Okay, that's it. That's all this man does. He lies and he smears. Now, he wants to say Nancy Pelosi is crazy as a bedbug. Please give a little listen to what he said this morning about why he felt the need to defame and besmirch and smear Ambassador Masha Yovanovitch. Now, he could have fired her, And one of her last questions to the Republican, one of her last answers to one of the Republicans' questions was, listen, I understand I serve at the pleasure of the president. Not a problem. But why did he have to ruin my reputation? Here's why.
Ambassador that, everybody says is so wonderful, she wouldn't hang my picture in the embassy, okay? She's in charge of the embassy. She wouldn't hang it. It took like a year and a half or 2 years for her to get the picture up. She said bad things about me. She wouldn't defend me, and I have the right to change an ambassador. And Rudy didn't say good things, but he wasn't crazy about it. It wasn't like a major topic. But I have the right to change. This was an Obama person didn't want to hang my picture in the embassy. It's standard is you put the President of the United States picture in an embassy. This was not an angel, this woman, okay? There were a lot of things that she did that I didn't like.
She wouldn't hang his picture. But Nancy Pelosi is crazy. She wouldn't. Marie Yovanovitch's reputation had to be destroyed because it took her a year and a half, according to the president, who's probably never been in her office, but according to what he was hearing from Rudy. Now, any man that goes to Rudy Giuliani for foreign policy advice, to Lev Parnas, to Fruman, to Roger Stone, to Steve Bannon, to Steve Miller for foreign policy advice is running some sort of an operation. That they're not really concerned with foreign policy or advice. But the reason he calls Nancy Pelosi crazy as a bedbug today, and then when he's asked, why did you have to smear her, Marie Yovanovitch, why didn't you just let her go? It's because she didn't hang his picture fast enough. Took her a year and a half, according to what he hears, for her to hang his picture on her office wall, like the dear leader, like the mullahs demand, like some autocrat demands, like some religious freaking closed hermit society demands, like North Korea. Wow.
This is the Randi Rhodes Show. To speak with Randi, dial 561-270-3844. That's 561-270-3844.
Okay, here's the phone call testimony.
Now, you said that at some point Ambassador Sondland pulled out his cell phone and called President Trump. This was an unsecure cell phone, is that right?
Yes, sir.
In the middle of a restaurant in Kyiv?
Yes.
Now, you said that you were able to hear President Trump's voice through the receiver. Mm-hmm. How were you able to hear if it was not on speakerphone?
It was several things. It was quite loud when the president came on, quite distinctive. I believe Ambassador Sondland also said yesterday he often speaks very loudly over the phone, and I certainly experienced that. When the president came on, he sort of winced and held the phone away from his ear like this. And he did that for the first couple exchanges. I don't know if he then turned the volume down, if he got used to it, if the president moderated his volume, I don't know. But that's how I was able to hear it.
And so you were able to hear some of what President Trump said to President Zelensky, is that right?
The first portion of the conversation, yes.
And what did you hear President Trump say to I'm sorry, not President Zelensky, to Ambassador Sondland?
What I hear the
president say to Ambassador Sondland?
Yeah, he clarified whether he was in Ukraine or not, and he said, yes, I'm here in Ukraine. And then Ambassador Sondland said he loves your ass, he'll do anything you want. He said he can do the investigation.
So you heard President Trump ask Ambassador Sondland, is he going to do the investigation?
Yes, sir.
What was Ambassador Sondland's response?
He said, oh, yeah, he's going to do it. He'll do anything you ask.
And was that the end of the Ukraine portion of the conversation?
Yes.
Afterwards, you described a follow-on conversation that you had with Ambassador Sondland, where you asked him, I think, generally, what did President Trump think of Ukraine? Is that right?
Correct.
What did Ambassador Sondland say to you?
He said he doesn't really care about Ukraine.
Did he use slightly more colorful language than that?
He did.
What did he say that he does care about?
He said he cares about big stuff.
Did he explain what he meant by big stuff?
Well, I asked him, well, what kind of big stuff? We have big stuff going on here, like a war with Russia. And he said, no, big stuff like the Biden investigation that Mr. Giuliani is pushing.
Now, were you familiar with the Biden investigation that he referenced at that point?
Yes, sir.
And how do you have such a specific and clear recollection of this conversation with the president and your conversation with Ambassador Sondland?
Yeah. So this was a very distinctive experience. I've never seen anything like this in my foreign service career. Someone at a lunch in a restaurant making a call on a cell phone to the President of the United States. Being able to hear his voice, it's a very distinctive personality, so we've all seen it on television. Very colorful language was used. They were directly addressing something that I had been wondering about working on for weeks and even months. A topic that had led to the recall of my former boss, the former ambassador. And so here was a person who said he had direct contact with the president and had said that over the course of time. Here he is actually having that contact with the president. Hearing the president's voice and them talking about this issue of the Biden investigation that I'd been hearing about.
All right, here's the president this morning on the propaganda TV show.
How about the guy with the telephone? How about that one? I guarantee you that never took place. He said he's sitting there listening to me. I spoke so few times to him. But the guy yesterday on the telephone, David Holmes, yes, I heard the conversation. Well, I have really good hearing, and I've been watching guys for 40 years make phone calls, and I can't hear when and you could be 2 feet away. I can't hear people making calls. I can't hear the other side. The phone's up in the air unless you have it on a speakerphone.
Yeah, but Nancy Pelosi's crazy as a bed bug or whatever his, little metaphor was. Yeah, obviously the man screams. Obviously he yells. Obviously you could hear him, and every single person who ever sat next to somebody with a cell phone, especially like me, my mom screams. She screams on the phone because she can't hear well, so she assumes you can't hear her. Everybody that's next to me when I'm at the kitchen island is where I go after work to prepare, right? Of course, no recipe can start without chopping an onion. So I'm standing there with my cutting board and I'm cutting it, and Howard is on the phone still talking to business people, clients, whatever it is. I can hear what they're saying. I can hear him talking to his kids. I can hear everything. What's wrong with this man? It never happened. It never ever happened. Well, here's Jim Jordan getting slapped around on that theory too, asking David Holmes, why didn't Volker tell us about it? And David Holmes says everybody knew.
The call happened on the July 25th. That's 4 months ago. The transcript's been out for 2 months. Maybe the ambassador thought this is nothing new here. But Shazam, last week you come forward with supposedly this new information. There is nothing different in there than what we had on the transcript. Maybe that's the reason their star witness, their first witness, didn't bring it up. But they had to have something. So you're their closing witness because you overheard the president talking to Ambassador Sondland.
Sir, if I could answer, I see 4 seconds left on the clock. I believe that
Mr. Holmes, you may take as long as you need.
Thank you, sir. I believe that Ambassador Taylor did already know when I briefed him when I returned from vacation on the 6th. It was not news to him that the president was pressing for a Biden investigation.
That's not what I asked. I asked why he didn't share with us.
Mr. Jordan, please do not interrupt the witness any further. Mr. Holmes,
this is exactly
Mr. Jordan's time has expired, but yours has not.
Okay, thank you,
sir. You may
sir.
answer the question.
It's exactly my point. I briefed the call in detail to the Deputy Chief of Mission, went away for a week, come back, I refer to the call, and everyone is nodding. Of course that's what's going on. Of course the president is pressing for a Biden investigation before he'll do these things the Ukrainians want. There was nodding agreement. So did I go through every single word in the call? No, because everyone by that point agreed. It was obvious what the president was pressing for. And Ambassador Taylor, as you've just outlined, had all those other interactions with
But he
all
didn't share it with us.
Mr. Jordan, please do not interrupt.
But sir, then, but sir,
My vivid recollection of an event I was involved with was a touchstone experience that, to me, validated what, sir,
Mr. Jordan, please,
what we believed. And Ambassador Taylor was not in that call.
And so all of a sudden last week, you got to come tell us, right?
Mr. Jordan, your boss will allow the witness to answer the question.
I'll finish with this.
Thank you.
He was involved in a number of other interactions, as you've outlined, that brought him to the same conclusion. It is quite possible that
But he doesn't share the one that
Mr.
the guy
Jordan,
he worked
Mr.
with.
Jordan,
He doesn't share that
Mr.
one.
Jordan, you may not like the witness's answer, but we will hear it.
There wasn't an answer. It's a
Mr.
filibuster.
Jordan, we will hear the witness's answer. Have you concluded, Mr. Holmes?
I have.
Well, Bill Taylor did bring it up, as you remember, from day one of these hearings last week. He said that his that one of his staff members, David Holmes, had told him that there was a phone call between Sondland and the president in a restaurant, and that David Holmes, who he didn't name, he just said a staffer in the restaurant, overheard the president say, so you're going to do these, he's going to do these investigations, and Sondland answers, he'll do anything for you, he loves your, right? And then they hang up, and then the staffer, who we now know as David Holmes, says to Sondland, well, what does he think about Ukraine? And Sondland's answer is he doesn't give a blank about Ukraine. He cares about the big stuff. What's the big stuff? And David Holmes says there's big stuff going on here. You got a war. Ukraine is in a hot war, a shooting war with Russia right now on their homeland. For me, that's the big stuff. What's the big stuff for him? And he said the investigations on the Bidens that Rudy Giuliani asked for. Taylor did testify to that. There is no, I mean, I guess I forgot to pull it, but I mean, it's totally memorable that happened. Okay, so poor little Jim Jordan, who is always filibuster. I mean, at the end of those hearings yesterday, and that was not the closing witness. Fiona Hill was the closing witness. They can't even get their witnesses right. You know why? They're not in the room. They walked out. They had no questions. I pointed that out yesterday afternoon. The Republicans stopped asking questions of the witnesses because the witnesses were pummeling their defenses. Any defense, if the president was too stupid, that there was no quid pro quo. Oh, yes, there was. That there was an exchange that was talked about. Investigations for military aid. Investigations for a White House meeting. Investigations even for a phone call between Zelensky and the president. It was all a quid pro quo. It was all a shakedown. It was extortion. It was bribery. It was the president would use his official office to grant what you need and what American foreign policy required of us to do in exchange for you lying and investigating Donald Trump's political rival.
Your mind.
Your ambassador to the EU, Mr. Sondland, in his opening statement said that there was quid pro quo. There was quid pro quo, he said, because you wanted an investigation into corruption in exchange for a visit to the White House or something like that.
Yeah, well, that's total nonsense. I do want always corruption. I say that to anybody. Why should we give money to a country that's known corrupt? It's a very corrupt country. I mean, I love the people in Ukraine. I know Ukrainian people. They're great people. But it's known as being the third most corrupt country in the world.
Is that true? The answer is no. Here are the top 10 most corrupt countries in the world. You'll notice Ukraine is not on them. The most corrupt country in the world is Iraq, then Pakistan, then Iran, Nigeria, Colombia, Angola, Mexico, Ghana, Myanmar, and Guatemala. But that set aside that the president just makes crap up all the time, there were questions about Ukraine and benchmarks to meet with regard to corruption. And there was testimony that those benchmarks had been met. Hang on.
Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, I think the follow-up question that my colleague from New York did not ask you, but is relevant for everyone at home. Isn't it true that the Department of Defense had certified that the anti-corruption requirements of Ukraine had been met when the hold was put on by the president?
That is correct.
So let's smear him a little bit. All right, so there's that. And then there was Laura Cooper.
This president, as a champion of anti-corruption, your testimony today is that on May 23, you certified that as far as it related to your duties, Ukraine had met the corruption concerns for the aid to be released. Is that right?
Sir, the Defense Department certified.
And after that date, inexplicably, the President of the United States puts a hold on security assistance. Is that right?
That was what I heard in July, yes.
Now, this anti-corruption president who cares so much about rooting out corruption in Ukraine, did he ever call you after he put the hold to say, Ms. Cooper, what's going on in Ukraine?
No, sir.
Ambassador Hale, did he ever call you to ask about an update on Ukraine corruption?
No, sir.
Yeah, I think we're pretty clear that the corruption benchmarks had been met, that they were certified met by our Department of Defense. Laura Cooper and Colonel Vindman obviously work together with the Department of Defense and testified that that had happened. Also, I think what's important to know is that Obama gave more than blankets to the Ukrainians.
The justification is that the Obama administration only provided blankets, so the Ukrainians should be grateful, even after being shaken down that the Trump administration provided more. But the truth, Ms. Cooper, is that under the Obama administration and the European Reassurance Initiative, $175 million were provided from U.S. taxpayer dollars to the Ukrainians. Is that right?
Sir, I don't have that figure. The figure that we typically use is to say we've provided $1.6 billion to date. But I don't have the breakdown in front of me.
And the Obama administration also trained 5 military battalions of the Ukrainians. Is that correct?
Again, I don't have the figures in front of me, but yes, the training program began in the Obama administration, and we did train many forces.
And under the Obama administration founded Ukrainian Security Assistance Initiative provided to the Ukrainians were armored Humvees, tactical drones, night vision devices, armored vests, and medical equipment. Is that correct?
These all sound like pieces of equipment that were provided in the Obama administration, to my recollection.
You'd agree that's a lot more than blankets, right?
Yes, sir.
I mean, everything that you've been hearing on propaganda news networks, right-wing lunatic radio shows, conservative radio shows, idiot boy radio shows, everything that they're telling you is a lie. And I don't know why people want to believe the lie over believing in America and democracy and the rule of law, and that we don't extort, we don't shake down, we don't allow allies, to be accused of things that they're not doing. I don't understand why you have to defame an ambassador instead of just letting her go by saying what they said in the end. President lost confidence in you. That he's entitled to do that. But why did he have to defame these people? Why does he have to call Nancy Pelosi crazy and then say the reason he fired and defamed the ambassador is because she didn't hang his picture on her wall for a year and a half? And I will tell you this, Scotty found that fascinating. So he did a little research and found that on September 11th, 2017, there was a Washington Post story that clearly said that Donald Trump had not yet sent out his pictures for public offices to hang. So he just lied about even that crazy part. I mean, this is just so unbelievable. And then this morning, in his crazy, it was off the hook. I mean, when Fiona Hill testified that the Republicans are repeating Russian intelligence agency talking points, that the whole idea of the CrowdStrike server being in Ukraine. By the way, CrowdStrike is a publicly traded company. I also pulled CrowdStrike's contributions to various, political parties. And here it is. This right here is a short list of their National Republican Congressional Committee donations. What did I just say? This is CrowdStrike's donations to the National Republican Congressional Committee. You can get this at opensecrets.org, which is Common Cause, who keeps track of all the money that they can see. Now, we have dark money that you can't see that's, funneled through PACs who don't have to disclose. However, when somebody does give money that you can see, it's accounted for on opensecrets.org or, the public reports, right? So on July 21st, 2017, CrowdStrike gave $40,000 to the National Republican Congressional Committee. On May 17th, 2018, CrowdStrike gave $40,000 to the National Republican Congressional Committee. On April 21st, 2017, CrowdStrike gave $39,500 to the National Republican Congressional Committee. And on August 17th, 2017, they gave $114. I have no idea why. But that now, when Fiona Hill was testifying, she begged the Republicans to please stop lying about CrowdStrike, number one, that because CrowdStrike is a publicly traded company, obviously its donations are trackable and they give to the Republican Party. And number two, the owner of the guy who founded, not the owner because it's public, but the guy who founded CrowdStrike is not Ukrainian. He is he's a Russian. Russia, Ukraine, two different countries. Ukraine, ally, giant, biggest country in Europe, by the way. Russia, also ran, broke down communist authoritarian oligarchy. Two different countries. And the president keeps repeating that this guy at CrowdStrike was Ukrainian. That is not true. She also begged them to stop repeating that the server was in Ukraine because that is a Russian intelligence agency piece of propaganda that they want perpetuated in the United States in order to pull the United States away from its ally, Ukraine. It serves their purpose. And she was very upset that the Republicans keep repeating Russian propaganda.
All things Randi at RandiRhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, the Randi Rhodes Show.
Based on questions and statements I've heard, some of you on this committee appear to believe that Russia and its security services did not conduct a campaign against our country, and that perhaps, somehow, for some reason, Ukraine did. This is a fictional narrative that has been perpetrated and propagated by the Russian security services themselves. The unfortunate truth is that Russia was the foreign power that systematically attacked our democratic institutions in 2016. This is the public conclusion of our intelligence agencies, confirmed in bipartisan congressional reports. It is beyond dispute, even if some of the underlying details must remain classified.
Okay, so there is Fiona Hill in her opening statement warning the GOP that they are repeating Russian intelligence agency talking points, Russian propaganda, in order to give cover to Russia for hacking. Now, Russia clearly hacked. The Russian intelligence agencies clearly hacked into the DNC. They clearly hacked into Hillary Clinton's personal emails. Donald Trump welcomed it. Nobody said there was a conspiracy between Donald Trump and the Russian intelligence agencies to do the hacking. That is not anything that anybody ever said. What people said was that he welcomed it and encouraged it and benefited from it. That's what Mueller found. That's what's in the Mueller report, and that is the truth, because we have Donald Trump standing on a stage on July 27th saying, Russia, if you're listening, I hope you can find the 30,000 emails that are missing. Our press will reward you mightily. And later that day, Russia tries to hack into Hillary Clinton's servers. So that is the conspiracy. But she keeps saying, stop talking about this CrowdStrike thing. The guy, first of all, who founded it is not Ukrainian. He's Russian. And you idiots, on the Intelligence Committee ought to know the difference between the two countries. And you ought to know when something is propaganda coming from an adversary's national intelligence services, and that you have a very sick man as president who continues to put that out there, and you're doing the same damage to the United States that he's doing. This was him this morning.
They have the server, right, from the DNC, Democratic National Committee.
Who has the server?
Now, the FBI went in and they told him, get out of here. We're not giving it to you. They gave the server to CrowdStrike or whatever it's called, which is a company owned by a very wealthy Ukrainian. And I still want to see that server. The FBI has never gotten that server. That's a big part of this whole thing. Why did they give it to a Ukrainian company?
Are you sure they did that?
Are you sure?
Are you sure they gave it to Ukraine?
Well, that's what the word is, and that's what I asked actually in my phone call, if you know.
That is a debunked conspiracy theory. And in fact, there was plenty of testimony about it.
Would like you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot and Ukraine knows a lot about it. I would like you to find out what happened with this whole situation with Ukraine. They say CrowdStrike. I guess you have one of your wealthy people, the server. They say Ukraine has it. Now, Dr. Hill, is this a reference to this debunked conspiracy theory about Ukraine interference in the 2016 election that you discussed in your opening statement, as well as with Chairman Schiff?
The reference to CrowdStrike and the server, yes, that's correct.
And it is your understanding that there is no basis for these allegations, is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, isn't it also true that some of President Trump's most senior advisors had informed him that this theory of Ukraine interference in the 2016 election was false?
That's correct.
So is it your understanding then that President Trump disregarded the advice of his senior officials about this theory and instead listened to Rudy Giuliani's views?
That appears to be the case, yes.
Oh, God. And he's still doing it. This morning, he started rambling about the Steele dossier, which was not relied on for anything, and Ukraine.
They thought I was going to win, and they said, how could we stop him? They wrote up the phony fake dossier, the disgusting fake dossier, and they tried to have it put out prior to the election, just to show you how incompetent they were. They spent millions and millions of dollars. Hillary Clinton paid for it, and the Democrats. A lot of it had to do, they say, with Ukraine.
But Mr. President,
it's very interesting. It's very interesting.
It's not interesting. It's a debunked conspiracy theory that you keep saying, because you're an illegitimate president. You know that you have to cheat in order to win, and you're willing to do it again in 2020. And you want this time for China to come, or you want this time for Ukraine to lie, or you want this time for, this is just, this is mass madness. And what's listen, here's a previous ambassador, Mike McFaul, who was the ambassador to Russia.
And when the President of the United States says in a call to President Zelensky, you need to look into this CrowdStrike thing, this DNC server thing, that is him repeating Putin propaganda. I want to be clear about that. That is what the Russians have been feeding into our news cycle, into our news media. I just wrote an op-ed about it this week in the Washington Post, reminding people it's not just the stuff they do with trolls and bots. It's they put this stuff into the media, and then our media, usually on the right, then amplifies it. And the President of the United States has been taken by this myth, propagated by Mr. Giuliani, propagated by others, and Fiona Hill was putting down a marker. Folks, we have to stop this. And she was, I think, trying to preempt what might come later in this hearing about somehow, the Ukrainian interference in our election. That is propaganda put out by the Kremlin, and we as a country have to stop amplifying it in our debate as we run up to the 2020 election.
So, I got a small stream sound effect. I was going to play Trump. I always want corruption, which is what he said this morning. But this is well. Here's where we are. If we don't get very active here, if we don't start calling these senators, these GOP senators, if we don't start speaking up for our democracy, if we don't start talking about how this is a nation of laws and whether or not you like this man, you don't like this man, he obviously broke the law. He obviously lies to the American people regularly. He obviously repeats Putin's propaganda. He obviously tweets it. He retweets it. He amplifies it. He smears veterans he doesn't like. I mean, this was so disgusting what they did to Lieutenant Colonel Vindman. I just couldn't even believe what they were willing to do. It's just to save their party and not to save our democracy or our country. That's why they're doing it. They figure if Trump goes down, the entire GOP goes down with it, because the previous GOP president got us into this endless war in Iraq based on a lie, tortured people, literally, and created ISIS. And now this one is breaking the law 8 ways to Sunday, spouting Russian propaganda, aligning himself with every autocrat in the world, from Duterte to Putin to Kim Jong-un to Xi Jinping, okay? And literally doing the most damage that we've ever seen done to the rule of law in this country. So if we don't start getting active and calling these senators and telling them, you know, it's time to choose between your party and this country.
Call in, connect. To speak to Randi, call 561-270-3844. 561-270-3844.
The bottom line is all of those witnesses, they're all shifty shifts. Don't forget, there was no due process. You can't have lawyers. We couldn't have any witnesses.
That is a lie. In fact, the fact checkers have checked this morning's little 53-minute appearance on Fox News, and they have documented 18 false statements in his Fox and Friends appearance this morning. He lied almost 20 times on Fox News this morning. This is just unbelievable. Look, the evidence is clear. The president did it. He did it, and he got caught because he's an idiot. It's not that he was an idiot and couldn't think of it. As Lindsey Graham said, it's not that they had an incoherent Ukraine policy. The Ukraine policy, as set forth by Rudy Giuliani, Mick Mulvaney, Mike Pompeo, everybody in the White House, as was testified to, they all knew. Everybody knew. Everyone knew what the policy was, and it was to shake down, it was to extort, it was to bribe Ukraine. It was to take things that Ukraine desperately needed. The backing of the United States, a formal White House, visit to show Russia that the United States was backing Ukraine in this Russian-Ukrainian war, so that Zelensky, the new president, could negotiate with Vladimir Putin from a position of strength, saying, yes, you outgun us, you outman us militarily, but we have the full support and backing of the United States of America. Let's do a peace deal. Let's end this occupation. Let's end this shooting war. Let's end your incursion, your invasion into the eastern part of Ukraine, the Donbass region. Let's do that. Let's sit down and talk. And Trump wouldn't give it to him. He wouldn't give him a phone call. He wouldn't give him a meeting. He wouldn't give him the military aid unless and until Zelensky would lie and say that they were investigating the CrowdStrike conspiracy, the 2016 CrowdStrike conspiracy, and unless and until they said that they were going to investigate the Bidens, his political opponent. That's illegal. You can't do it. It violates not just the oath of office, not just the office of the presidency, not just the duty to faithfully execute the laws and not break them, but it also violates our foreign policy. People were sitting there completely confused. What the hell is going on? And now, the beauty part of these hearings, if you watch them, if you were a decent citizen and you watch them, is that now you know how many brilliant, smart, trusted, nonpartisan people work their tails off every day for a government salary in order to do diplomacy and avoid war with adversaries around the world, to come to the end of a Cold War, to come to the end of a Russian invasion, to come to the... People work their butts off. And they all are talking and meeting and trying to keep our policy on the same page so that we speak from a position of unity and a position of strength. And they're speaking at the behest of the president of the United States. And now nobody knows who to talk to. Oh, talk to Rudy? Really? Rudy Giuliani is going to run our foreign policy? That particular freak is going to run American foreign policy? A man who apparently is accountable to no one. It's so sick. And that the people inside our State Department, the people inside our embassies, the people inside our Department of Defense, the people inside our State Department, we're all saying, stop pursuing this crazy conspiracy theory. Let's get to the real business of letting Ukraine and Russia sit down and negotiate an end to this war. Let's do it. Let's go forward. Let's give them what they need to defend themselves, but let's also give them the backing of the United States. And Donald Trump saw that as a thing of an official act that he could leverage for a thing of value for his own personal benefit. So he could cheat. So he could cheat in an election. Look, once a cheater, always a cheater. The man has cheated his whole life. That's why he doesn't want to release his tax returns. He's a tax cheat. He cheats on his wives. He cheats at golf. And he cheats at business. You know, there's an older story in the Washington Post. I think I put it in the homework today so you could do a little flashback and recall that Donald Trump, when he was a businessman, when he would talk to publicly traded companies, they didn't want him on the call because they were always afraid that he would violate securities law, that he would use insider information, that he would do something to, jeopardize their businesses. They never even wanted him on their phone calls because he's a cheater. Robert Mueller testified that Donald Trump committed perjury, that he lied generally in his written answers that Mueller was able to get him to write. Robert Mueller's report said he obstructed justice 10 separate times. The man cheats. And if he wants to sit on Fox News and he wants to say that these were shifty Schiff's witnesses.
The bottom line is all of those witnesses, they're all shifty Schiffs. Don't forget, there was no due process. You can't have lawyers. We couldn't have any witnesses.
Then he's going to have to say why he won't let Mike Pompeo or Mick Mulvaney or Rudy Giuliani or Rick Perry or John Bolton or Charles Kupperman testify. Why is he obstructing what he believes would be exculpatory evidence? If he believes that Pompeo will defend him, if he believes that Bolton could shed some light that would, be in his favor, if he thinks Mulvaney would shed light that would be in his favor, if he thinks Giuliani would shed light that would be in his favor, why doesn't he allow them to testify? Because he knows they can't. Bolton finally got his Twitter account back from the White House, who had taken over Bolton's Twitter account. Apparently, I don't know, they changed his password or something, so he couldn't log on, and Bolton had to go through Twitter and finally get Twitter to return to John Bolton his own personal Twitter account. Not his official, but his personal. And today, he started tweeting. Now, listen, John, I get that you want to cash out and cash in. $2 million payday awaits you. I promise you, if you testified and you became, the John Dean of this whole thing, your book would sell a whole lot better. A whole lot better. We're still waiting for the unredacted Mueller report. We're still waiting for Don McGahn, who's mentioned 1 billion times in the Mueller report, to be cleared by the court to testify. We expect that decision on Monday. Whether or not Don McGahn, the former White House counsel, can testify. Look, he does what every autocrat does. He puts propaganda out there. He runs the clock. He lives in an alternative universe. He creates facts. Kellyanne Conway gave you a heads up. She said he likes alternative facts, meaning alternative reality, meaning things that didn't happen that he wants to say did happen. He likes to promote conspiracy theories. He likes to promote himself over this country. He likes autocrats. There are phone calls that are still locked up. There was a call with Putin where Donald Trump got on the phone, first phone call with Putin and told the former KGB guy that he wants a friendship with Kim Jong-un And all the authoritarians that are hostile to the United States, he needs to know how does he cozy up to them, because they have something Donald Trump doesn't have. Complete control of the media, complete control of the people and what they believe to be true. He called Duterte, Shinzo Abe. Hey, Shinzo, nominate me for a Nobel Prize. I mean, this is sick.
Oh! This is the Randi Rhodes Show. To speak with Randi, dial 561-270-3844. That's 561-270-3844.
While Ambassador Volker and I visited the front, as a member of my staff accompanied Ambassador Sondland. Ambassador Sondland met with Mr. Yermak. Following that meeting, in the presence of my staff at a restaurant, Ambassador Sondland called President Trump and told him of his meetings in Kyiv. The member of my staff could hear President Trump on the phone asking Ambassador Sondland about the investigations. Ambassador Sondland told President Trump the Ukrainians were ready to move forward. Following the call with President Trump, the member of my staff asked Ambassador Sondland what President Trump thought about Ukraine. Ambassador Sondland responded that President Trump cares more about the investigations of Biden, which Giuliani was pressing for. At the time I gave my deposition on October 22nd, I was not aware of this information.
So he did testify about it, and Holmes testified about it, and the phone call, the July 25th transcript, they were walked through it. Each and every witness was walked through it, including Donald Trump and the GOP's witnesses. I mean, they did call their witnesses. Their witnesses were Volker, Tim Morrison, Ambassador Sondland. Because Ambassador Sondland had given $1 million to Donald Trump, and still he wouldn't take the fall. So Sondland lied. I mean, he lied about a lot of stuff. I mean, there's no question that man lied. And if it was just his testimony, I would have problems with it because he's a liar. So you can make that argument. If you lie now, or were you lying then, or you're lying now? Because Sondland decided to split the baby. What Sondland decided to do was to give the impeachment inquiry Pompeo and Mulvaney and Rick Perry and Giuliani and, Volker. He decided that he would give all these people, he would say that they all knew, they were in on it. It was a scheme. It was a plot. It was a plan. Everything was in exchange for they wanted an official act from the United States. And that official act was withheld pending the lying about the CrowdStrike server and the investigations into the Bidens. So there was obviously extortion going on, and a bribe that was, and still to this day, Zelensky never got his White House visit. So, they say, oh, the crime wasn't complete. Well, you don't have to murder somebody to be accused of attempted murder, but this was a complete crime because Zelensky has never gotten his White House meeting. But that said, what Sondland wouldn't give was that he understood that it was a violation of the law. So he decided he would not say that he understood military aid was being held up. Although he admits it in questioning, he won't say it to the Republicans, but in questioning by the Democrats, he admits, yes, the military aid. Yes, I knew it was military. I mean, it's just so sick how they try to split the baby here because they all broke the law too. They're accessories to bribery. That means there's a conspiracy to defraud the United States of America. And as I said early on, this is a RICO violation. What you have here is the entire executive branch under Donald Trump running a racketeering and corrupt enterprise. This is a RICO violation. Now, I don't expect that the Democrats will come up with an article of impeachment that invokes RICO, but they should, because every single person, from the Secretary of State to the President of the United States, even Mike Pence was, implicated by Sondland and Volker and Tim Morrison. And I mean, everybody understood what was going on. Pence knew. Mulvaney knew. OMB, right? Everybody knew. And they were all aiding and abetting the conspiracy theory, the lie, and the bribery, and the extortion, and the scam, the whole entire corrupt organization. And that's why I'm saying to you, whether you like this president, you think he's a tough guy, you like the racism, whatever it is about him that you dig, okay? Whatever it is about him that you just, oh, I've never seen anything like him, and I just, you know, he broke the law, and America is in peril. Our democracy is in danger. It is being attacked by a country we're going to be more like than we'll be like ourselves. We will be more like Russia. We will be more like the Philippines. We will be more like Turkey. We will be more like Saudi Arabia than we will be like America if this man is not held to account. Because if he's not, who will be? Who will be? And for those of you who like whataboutism, imagine Obama did this. Imagine Obama called the Saudis and said, you know, you could be in the G7. We want you in the G7, but you just killed Jamal Khashoggi. And you just tortured your relatives and killed one of them in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. Imagine if Obama reached out to Russia and told Russia that they could be back in the G8, even though they annexed Crimea and they're fighting a live war with Ukraine, our ally. The President of the United States is a very serious job, and we need serious people. The President of the United States is supposed to talk to, leaders across the world and find common ground where he can and listen to what they're saying so he can absorb, and then he can realize where we have substantive agreements and we can work, and where we have substantive disagreements and they have to meet anti-corruption benchmarks in order to get F-35s, in order to get into the G8, in order to get into NATO. But this president does nothing about, like that. This president is trying to befriend every dictator in the world who cheats at their elections because he wants that. He wants to be able to do that. He wants complete control over the media. He wants complete control over Congress. He doesn't even want to go to Congress, okay? He finds Congress an appendage he doesn't need. Well, we have 3 co-equal branches of government. That is what makes America an amazing country. We are a nation of laws, not a nation of men. And if the GOP understands, which I believe they do, that when Donald Trump is, destroyed because he's just another crook. Steve Bannon had a stronger word about it. He said, Donald Trump's presidency will fail when Americans realize he's just another something bag. And he is just another something bag who cheated and cheats at everything and is cheating us. Cheating us from progress, cheating us out of clean water, cheating us out of clean air, cheating us out of, being in the 21st century. Truly. Brother David.
I love the smell of impeachment in the morning.
It smells like victory.
You think?
Yeah.
Sister. Okay, let me, a quick shout out to the chat room. You know what to do. Tell anyone you know to go to www.randirhodes.com and or call the pledge line. I want those T-shirts. I'm like Cruella de Vil with the puppies. Okay, so I'm going to just drop kick into context. Last night I went to bed on a cloud of happiness because A, it was my day off, so I did not have to commiserate with bereaved Medicare beneficiaries or marketplace consumers. And I just saw It's a Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. And don't go, 3-sentence review. Don't go expecting a Mr. Rogers biopic. Bring Kleenex. Remember why Mr. Rogers' spirit matters and still matters.
Oh.
It's very beautiful. The Hanks is at Streepian levels, and Mr. Reese has never been better. And
he's
amazing.
Tom Hanks is a truly amazing individual.
He's unbelievable. He just is Mr. Rogers, but I digress.
Wow.
And then I woke up this morning on a high from that and went to my computer, and there was Randy Rainbow's latest parody on my feed of He's Just a Girl Who'll Quid Pro Quo, and I fell out of bed.
So I wish we could play music on this show, which we can't.
I understand.
But I will tell you, for those of you who don't know, on Twitter there are, Trump's rants of I don't want nothing, I don't want nothing, that were done a la the white supremacist Morrissey, that were done a la the Ramones, that were done.
Right.
I mean, there's so many great parodies out there.
There's a lot of stuff out there. Pardon me. I can't recommend it strongly enough. If you haven't seen it, catch it, because he just keeps topping himself, that one. And then I went down and started making my eggs at my kitchen island, and November 22nd.
Yeah.
And so thank you for starting with what you started with, because it's true. That was
not
the
only
Pitbull
is it true, but the nerve of this president. I mean, Ronald Reagan was shot, but JFK was assassinated.
Assassinated in front of all of us.
And this, in front of the whole world. It was. I remember that. I mean, I was a little kid, but
same here.
I remember being let out of school early and coming home to find my mother on the bed, hysterical, crying. But the nerve of Donald Trump to say, "No president has been treated worse than me." Are you freaking kidding me? I mean, just on the simplest things, he is incapable of understanding America, our history, the losses we've suffered, the victories we've had. He doesn't get it. Go to RandiRhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.